Good afternoon, dear participants of this discussion, honorable representatives, heads of NGOs and charitable foundations, representatives of the projects that deal with the development of civil society in Ukraine. Today we have an event, and we decided to do it for several reasons. First, the topic that is noted, the name of this press conference is Foreign Agents 2.1, and it looks like history repeating Ukraine past such things many times. And this draft law 3564 about financing of NGOs and charitable organizations, it was introduced the last, but this is not the only draft law concerning this. There are different draft laws that are introduced, and they have the aim to make civil society toxic. Why I'm saying this? Because this is an attack on those who have part of foreign financing, but in reality, taking into account that 90% of the sector is financed like this, the state unfortunately was not able, like in other countries, to take this role. This is turned on the pressure on civil society and NGOs. And as a moderator and head of the board of UCMC, and previously I worked in the state sector, and we all remember, those who are present here today, that in 2003 there was Communist Party. They've created some commissions. They tried to attack some NGOs. This failed, but this led to events of the Orange Revolution as the result. These actions, these were erroneous actions of pressure on civil society. Second example in our history is right before the Revolution of Dignity. First, these were the attempts of separate deputies. They introduced such initiatives with the same names, actually. You may check it up in 2013. And then these dictatorship laws that say about foreign agents, and we know the result. The result is that all Ukraine rose, and this was one of the bricks that led to this opposition in our society. Once again, we see now somehow the situation is created, this topic is raised, and you know that in Russia, they have complicated consequences of this. These organizations, these foreign agents, in the media, they adopted legislation that even physical persons become foreign agents in Russia. And our officials camouflaged this. They didn't name this like this, but why we've decided to respond now? We know that now this draft law is considered in the committees. Shortly speaking, they are not professional. They are not done in the right way. But we believe that now putting such ideas that somehow someone would be condemned in state treason, or someone should pass a polygraph, and a National Defense and Security Council and Zelensky and the ministers, they would check these NGOs. So this is a provocation. We understand this. And there are many things that show that those who are inspired by such ideas and the authors, they won't stop on this. And this is the proposal of the party of power. This is not just one person. This is also others. Some discussion is needed inside the party in order to have healthy forces that should prevent such provocations that would lead to such an attitude to civil society. And today, I would like to consider why it is done now, why it is introduced to the parliament now. Are there some problems with alternative financing, and also those issues that we've mentioned on our agenda. Now I'm going to stop and give the floor to Maksym Latsyba. He represents Ukrainian Independent Center for Political Studies. And I would like to ask you to look through those issues. Do we have some parallels with Russian side? Do you see them there? Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Maksym Latsyba, Ukrainian Independent Center for Political Studies. This draft law got the title as the draft law on foreign agents because this is the name of the law in Russia. This is draft law on transparency of NGOs with foreign support, number 3564. Mr. Dubinsky's draft law limits the freedom of association in Ukraine, and draft law discriminates part of charity organizations who cooperate with the civilized world. It limits access of citizens, common Ukrainians, to international and humanitarian help, legal help. All Ukrainian society suffers because of this in case of adoption of this law. There are parallels, and we may see how dictatorship of Vladimir Putin was established. He started with attacks on civil society in the Russian Federation. They adopted the law on foreign agents with the same norms that look similar. They were implemented, and those organizations who get foreign support, they were obliged to add foreign agents to put this in their materials. There were additional reportings, additional register within the Ministry of Justice, and this limited the activity. And now in the Russian Federation they do not have active civil society that can control power and protect the rights of citizens. And we see that their rights are violated, and we see non-democratic form of power in Russia. And Mr. Dubinsky, deputy from 7th of the People Party, he wants to direct Ukraine to the same way. This is against the sector of lawyers, of those who protect human rights. Also, local government does not provide financing for such organizations, and Dubinsky wants to limit the access of citizens to legal help. And I got such help from Ukraine Helsinki group when criminal cases was fabricated in times of Yanukovych, because we participated with my brother in the meeting near the residence of Yanukovych, and we were helped by the lawyer, and I'm grateful for this international help. Dubinsky is against those charity organizations who provided help to hundreds of thousands of IDPs. Social services, and this is supported by international support to thousands and even millions of people who had to flee from occupied territories of Donbass. Also, this draft law is against those organizations who promote European reforms and European integration. Yesterday, we celebrated 3 years of visa-free regime. And NGOs, they really contributed. They came to European institutions to help get this visa-free regime. And tens of thousands of Ukrainians used this visa-free regime and traveled abroad. Also, this draft law is against reforms in Ukraine. Now, children get prepared to the external testing, and this was reform that was introduced by Renascence Foundation, and Apura and other NGOs helped to promote this idea. And now, children from the villages have the chance to enter Ukrainian higher educational institutions. So this is international help in the interest of citizens of Ukraine. And Dubinsky wants to close such organizations or limit them to a great extent. And how does Mr. Dubinsky wants to close these organizations that help Ukrainians? How so? To provide the notion that these are NGOs with foreign support that have more than 50% of funding from abroad, and they would need to have special marking. They should have these words in their title, and all the materials should mention that they are supported by foreign. They want to provide censorship against such organizations. There should be reporting to the Ministry of Justice. So we should provide our own materials first to the Ministry of Justice, and then we will be able to publish them. So this is censorship on the freedom of speech, and this is the fundamental right that is violated by this draft law. I do not know how would the minister deal with this, because these are huge expenses from the state budget, and you know that our budget is really limited and underfunded, and Dubinsky wants to deepen budget crisis also in Ukraine, and also the Ministry of Justice may provide sanctions and apply to court to close these organizations. Also, they turn the workers of such organizations into criminals, because they say that leadership of such organizations should pass a polygraph test, and there should be video recording with a psychological reaction recording, and this study should be obligatory. This is not done for the military, even for intelligence officers. Do you remember those people who were traitors and they were not checked? And in Yanukovych's time, the state treason and Minister of Defense, SBU, intelligence officers, they do not pass a polygraph test. And somehow NGO leadership should pass a polygraph test. So it looks like this is like exclusion zone. These people won't be able to participate in the activities. So about sanctions, if you worked for such organizations, you will be prohibited to work in state organizations. If you are public service, work in public service, so you will be prohibited to work there. So those people who want to work in public service, they will be deprived of this opportunity. And these managers will be those who would be provided by oligarchs and will serve the interests of oligarchs, like Dubinsky He worked for Kolomoisky in 1+1 for a 1+1 channel, and we see how he votes, and we see that he continues his work for Kolomoisky. I would like to say that we are not speaking about people, we are speaking about approach. This is not just one deputy. If it was just one deputy, we know such initiatives, this spam that goes. And I see that this is a campaign that is ongoing. Thank you very much. You've analyzed this document quite well. Several words more. So I agree with Valery. This is an attack. This is not a separate issue. And in 3 or 4 months, we see that there is a mass of draft laws that limit opportunities and the rights of civil society. These are 4 draft laws and the Dubinsky draft law that limit about lobbying, that limits the opportunities of NGOs to provide for the interests of their participants and prevent the promotion of their ideas, limit participation in public consultations concerning state issues. Also, draft law of Dubinsky that also practically speaks about lustration of civil society activists in the state service. He wants to discharge all state servicemen who previously or now are the members of NGOs. Also, Fyodor Khristenko opposition platform draft law. Khristenko was about this lustration, and the draft law 3191, the draft law of Dubinsky, is to squeeze out NGOs out of participants out of public service. So foreigners somehow may had the state enterprises, but participants of NGO cannot. So this is nonsense. They are discriminated, and they are even more discriminated than foreigners themselves. So this draft law is discriminatory, and it is an attack on civil society, and we should revoke it. And I call on all democratic forces, all the deputies, political parties, to protect civil society and prevent adoption of this draft law that would significantly deteriorate the situation with the rights of people in Ukraine. Thank you very much. So you really went into details, even more than necessary. Legally, this document looks really unprofessional, and I would like to ask the head of the organization and the person who carried out examinations for tens of years, Center of Political and Legal Reforms. They provided special assessment. And here we have Igor Koliushko. He is the head of the center. I would like to ask 2 questions. First, how do you assess this wave of such draft laws? And is it okay that Ukrainian parliament has such quality of draft laws and draft laws with such aims, and we do not have proper response of political parties, those who introduce such initiatives? How to respond correctly? Or maybe this legal spam, I believe these documents, they are just unprofessional, they should die out, but maybe we should increase legal culture in Ukraine. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to this discussion. I agreed to participate even before I've read this draft law that we are discussing today. If I read it before I got your invitation, I'm not sure I would come here. But I gave you my word, that's why I followed. So I believe that this draft law is just some kind of a joke, I believe. This name that was mentioned by Mr. Latsyba so many times, I only heard this name in October for the first time in my life, and I didn't know about him before, and I do not know about this person anything. I believe that any people, MP, should have opportunities not to write such open, legally illiterate things, even if he doesn't know legal things. If he doesn't know anything, at least he should have an assistant, a helper. That's why when I looked through this draft law, I made an impression that this is just a stupid joke. I'm not sure what the aim is. Maybe this is some interpersonal relations here present, but I agree completely that MP does not have the right to do such things. These people should be responsible for their actions. Everything that is signed by MPs, it should be done really well, and there should be proper state position. Another side of this case. Why there is anti-state context in these drafts. And I don't believe that this is about destroying civil society. They do not strangle me, like Mr. Latsyba said, that these draft laws, they strangle civil society. I don't believe so, but something will change in my life. I will be fully alienated from the state. And Zelensky provided the draft law on people's power through referendum. This is a draft law. 90% preserved the work of our group in 2015, 2017, and there are many examples of draft laws from Servant of the People Party that were developed and prepared by the analytical centers, our analytical centers, and many others. And if they won't use these draft laws, they wouldn't have what to do and what to consider. Maybe they would consider such draft laws that we discussed today. So this approach, it is fully directed not against civil society, I believe, but against the state, against the prospects of development of our society. If you look at all wealthy nations, we will see high importance of such factors as self-organization of people and analytical centers and funds, and such powerful nations as USA, Norway, and others, they are able to solve all their problems through state budget, but they have a huge sector in the life of their society, the needs of which are covered by public initiatives, by civil society organizations, because this is more efficient. And this draft law and initiatives like this, they kill this cooperation between civil society with the state bodies, and prevent this work. And they prevent, put brakes on the development of our cooperation. And And if he wants to implement this, maybe he wants to implement this, but maybe these are just some interpersonal, some concerning some interpersonal relations. Also, I believe that political force, the party, the faction, they should not do this. In February, they had the meeting. Oleksandr, the head of the party, had the meeting with analytical centers. He invited everyone to cooperation, to maximum support of the legal activity in the parliament. And at the same time, in 2 months, the member of the faction provides such a chef-d'oeuvre. And I believe that any civilized party that respects itself, they should deal with it. They should exclude this person who harms others, or he should explain his own position, because these are absolutely different things. What is said by the head of the party and what is done by the members of this party. So these are my emotions, my response to this draft law. Of course, I could bring some examples of some legal problems. For example, the president of Ukraine in this draft law, he is a civil servant in this draft law. So they put him in the state service. This is an interesting approach. What Zelensky thinks about this is interesting to know. And other things like this are stated by this draft law. So maybe we shouldn't even consider this document that is actually is legally illiterate. Maybe it will be easier to work, but maybe in these initiatives they try to block the work of the sector. They say that anyone who cooperates, they have limited rights, and also serious issue concerning the European Charter on Human Rights. There are grave violations of Constitution and human rights. I would like to speak about another thing, about this source of financing. So they try to say that some organizations are toxic, but financing, the main financing, goes through the government in Ukraine, through those projects, international and Ukrainian, and people feel that some source of financing that is foreign, it may contribute to some wrong actions of the organization, and this is repeated many times. And bringing the example of other nations, those who do this, this is not right, because in the USA, for example, when they speak about FARA and other examples of some mechanisms, this is not about this. This is about foreign influence. This is about foreign organizations. And in our case, these are Ukrainian organizations that now carry out reforms, and they are limited in the sources of financing. And I would like to mention the organization that contributed a lot concerning analysis of reforms and continue to do this, BRDO, and Oleksiy Dorohan. We asked him about their work in this area. Maybe you know. Do you have a mechanism to create funds and sources of financing to balance the situation that exists? Because what the state should do, what the government should do in order to provide support for NGOs, to provide resources in order to help implement reforms. The floor is given to you. Thank you. I will answer your question, but first I'm going to speak about one country, and you should guess what country it is. The country where the media is controlled more and more by Russians, those people who are close to Putin. A country where people are persecuted and killed, a country where journalists are killed. What is this country? Unfortunately, this is not only Russia. Unfortunately, we see now that Russia buys media market in Ukraine, that Ukrainian oligarchs, they start to do business with Russia and with the close allies of Putin. And we understand that the only barrier that stopped Ukraine to get closer to Russia, to integrate into the customs union. This was the ability of Ukraine to get united, to go to Maidan, and to say the clear no. Now the attack on civil society, once again, is ongoing from the same sources. Once again, Russia gets prepared to deprive Ukrainians of their voice, of ability to get united, to fight for the national interests and for Euro integration for Ukraine. So you've mentioned a sad context, but it doesn't matter what this draft law says or whether it will be adopted. This is not about creation of some close organizations that are here now, but to create the policy that hunts NGOs and civil society activists. Because the state machine, law enforcement in the Russian Federation, and the same scenario, they want to see in Ukraine those who inspire such initiatives. This is a situation in which the state bodies, they are fighting with the activists, with civil society, and prevent their normal work. Those norms that I mentioned, they are necessary, but they are secondary. It is not for us. It is not written for us. It is written for law enforcement services. What does this adoption of the draft law mean? It will be the signal, like in the Soviet Union, that those who think differently, rights and guarantees envisaged by law and constitution, they are not covered by this, and everything can be done with public activists. They will be sent to prison on fabricated cases, and they will be blamed in the media, they will be beaten, killed, or pressured. We should not have illusions. Maybe there will be a better wording with all the necessary reference, but the intention will be the same. These will be intentions of such people who create such initiatives, but what should the state do? Many instruments exist for technical help. Registration of projects, many of them go through the government. Donors, they there should be proper logotypes put. It is this is visibility requirements, and it shows who provides financial support. And NGOs, they do not take decisions. They do not sign orders. They do not vote for provisions. They do not adopt laws. What does it mean? It means that finally, no matter what NGOs advise, the final decision is taken by those who were elected by the people. So the government is elected and also nominated, and they also nominate those people concerning whom these limitations apply. So if someone doesn't want to appoint someone in some position, you do not need a law to do this. This is the decision of the body of power, and all these bodies, they are influenced by the people, by participating in elections, and all those limitations, they are artificial, but because the parliament may deal with these issues concerning the government and appoint the people they want to be in the government. About all the new organizations now, those changes, they are not directed to close. I believe this is not about closure of existing organizations, but this is the limitations for the organizations that potentially can be created. Each day, Ukrainians get united, they create new NGOs, and each day they search for money in private sector, and they search money within international donors. And these limitations will make it difficult, and this will limit entering of new NGOs, those who want to make change. So this is the reverse change than the initiator proposes. This doesn't create big problem because they have lawyers, accountants who may deal with it in all the organizations, but this will prevent the new initiatives that would like to enter the sector, because this will be more difficult for them to create such NGOs. After the killing of Katerina Gansyuk, I spoke with the executive director of Transparency International, and he said that it is difficult to search now for people for the work in Transparency International. This is not connected with the BRDO activity, but this is the context we are working in. If young people are afraid to work in the sector, then we will be in the situation there will be more corruption, and the best thing the state may do is not to interfere. The state has many instruments to fight the organizations that are working against sovereignty, and this is in the code. These provisions are laid down in the code, and the deputies, they have enough instruments to fight even without these draft laws. Thank you very much for this aspect. You have said that sometimes civil society is a sector. It works with the state, it helps in good times, but sometimes it should control if there are no proper mechanisms. This is the bright example of Katerina Gansyuk case. And we will see further developments in this case, and we see that big role was played by NGOs, by civil society in this case. I remember Irina Bekeshkina, she contributed a lot to the development of civil society and the Fund of Democratic Initiatives. In 2005, they provided exit poll activities, and the power then failed their functions concerning protection of law and supremacy of law. And in this situation, Democratic Initiative Center, Razumkov Center, and Kiev Institute of Sociology, they provided a chance for the people, and they helped them to have their rights, election rights protected. And we have a representative of Democratic Initiative, and we would like to ask you about this aspect. In your opinion, in this situation, what is the aim, the main aim, not of one person, but recently During the last months, I believe there appear a wave to make Western help toxic. This helps through different international structures. Why now? We haven't seen this before during the previous president, maybe only when they spoke about declaring for NGOs. And now this new wave appears. Why it happens now? Thank you for invitation. And I believe that the most important and critical aspect is that this initiative is not by one deputy, but a group of deputies, part of which represent a majority fraction, and
this imposes some definite risk that this may become the dominating idea. I do not wish to criticize this draft law in detail. I think it is absurd, but as Tatiana Pechonchuk from Zmina NGO formulated it, that all the NGOs are intended to be forced to wear so-called the David's star to demonstrate that they are toxic, that they could not be trusted because they got their money from not Ukrainian government or organizations, and sooner or later this same impression might spread among general public that those NGOs are really toxic. From 2014 and even earlier, only 3 institutions in society gain the biggest trust in society. These are only army, church, and NGOs. Now the president has some balance of trust or mistrust from population, but from 2016, all those 3 institutions which are mentioned as the most trusted institutions, unfortunately, the church, according to the law, should be clearly separated from the state. The army is controlled by the authorities, by the elite in power. And some examples in Africa showed the failures of charismatic impact of army on society. And only NGO, only civil society, when it criticizes the people in power, could be trusted and is capable to develop some strategies which would allow the society at large to develop and to go forward. I think that even previous previous authorities tried to make pressure on civil society, but that people in power required support from NGOs and civil society in general, because they had much weaker support from society in general, and that trust to NGOs in general, which society has, it allowed the previous government implement some tough reforms. And perhaps those tough reforms are very much needed in Ukraine, and the authorities with weaker trust from poor trust from population are unable to implement those reforms. Now, the uh, the power is able to implement tough reforms without additional support from civil society. But there are some MPs who would like to make their chances equal to those civil society organizations, which that is to add some element of distrust, civic distrust to NGOs, and suggest maybe we are not perfect as MPs, but we are Ukrainians, while those people, those NGOs, they get money from abroad, they work for the foreign interests. And as our experience of NGO work suggests, our transparency, which you can trace back on our website, allows to that despite all the attempts to raise scandals around anti-corruption NGOs, etc., the public at large still has a lot of trust to these NGOs. Thank you. Thank you for your opinion. You have raised very interesting issues from the past, from today, and as the person was affiliated with the previous power as an ambassador of Ukraine, I would like to say that the previous government had set a task to me as an ambassador in the United States of America, that I should make everything possible to get all possible assistance for the reform implementation. And at some period, the United States had cut down the allocated resources for reforms, for the judicial reform, for healthcare reform, and at that very moment I received a task from the previous government to look for money in the United States, to ask the government in the United States to support these reforms in Ukraine. And jointly with the Ukrainian government, the United States government co-financed that reforms, and I saw with my own eyes how NGOs working in Ukraine, how they strengthen trust to those reforms in the United States. And today we have Maria Geletiy, who is one of the leaders of the sectoral civil society support project. And my question to Maria, whether we can expect for a long work of those projects like yours, and how do you feel about this new draft law, and about the interest in today's Ukraine as to similar projects of support for civil society? Thank you. Our donor, USAID, has been supporting Ukrainian democratic institutions for a long period of time, and they act via such a big intermediaries as big international and respectful international organizations. Our project started its work on October 1st, 2019, and the project will stay operational till October 2024, and our objective is to strengthen the capacity of Ukrainian charity and volunteer organizations and to improve the financial capacity of civic society organizations, because as all our surveys suggest, this is financial sustainability of Ukrainian NGOs, which is the weakest element of the activity, and we managed to fundraise from business, from other sources, but unfortunately we have to overcome many negative post effects. In the past, there was one project of the Yenanya and the ICPS project. So despite the challenges that we inherited, we nevertheless hope to reach the best possible result and try to neutralize the negative legislation. And our overall objective is to strengthen the financial capacity of Ukrainian NGOs eventually. As to your question for how long we would work, many people have a false imagination that donors come and they simply donate money and that's it. The process is much more comprehensive. Donors find Ukrainian partners who announce, then they announce their project call, and Ukrainian NGOs submit their bids for this call and win the project. And our project clearly shows that any financial support of civil society, it's not simply giving money. This money come from specific organizations which have very critical attitude towards what we are doing. I graduated from the International Relations Department, and our idea that we were taught to and which was rooted in our minds was that we should do everything to assist Ukraine. And now quite often we hear that NGOs get foreign money and do not pay taxes. They I should say that that's not true, because we are employed in the project. We pay taxes, payroll tax, personal income tax, and actually we employ a lot of people. And also, of course, we implement our project work, which is useful per se. Thus, we have very additional multiplying effects of all that donations which come to our organizations. I believe that politicians in the parliament should not strive to cut down the support of civil society organizations, but try to enlarge the support of them as much as possible. I would come back to the term Sorosists, which was labeled to some NGOs and to those people who get grants for education abroad, etc., or to some projects in Ukraine. I may offer a story of one young person who got support from the Soros Foundation for MBA in a good American university, where MBA costs $20,000 per year. So my question, for whom it was harmful that young person got best possible education, good international experience, and what is even more important, came back to Ukraine. And now we are able to enroll this person to a lot of work in Ukraine, which requires higher qualifications. Yeah, there is the whole range of problems. For having broad international experience, for me, all the words which I see in this draft law, they sound rather familiar. I recollect some Russian events and drafts when they try to create a group in a society. I believe that the problem in Ukraine is that we have very scarce charity foundations, especially during the years of independence, which might allow us to build up the independent, fully independent civil society. That's why we had invited the Renascence Foundation in Ukraine, which also is a subject of that attack of this draft law. And due to the Renascence Foundation, many changes in Ukraine took place during last 20 years. And when 20 years ago, when the question was asked where the state is supporting the civil society, at that time the government officials assured, yes, of course, we would allocate money, and nothing happened, while the Renascence Foundation had fulfilled a lot of projects since that time. So, Oleksandr, I would like to ask you a question, whether you got any thanks from the government in Ukraine for that huge amount of work which you had carried out, and whether there are any opportunities offered by Ukrainian legislation to strengthen the charity foundations and improve the coordination between them. Thank you. There is the whole range of questions, especially keeping in mind that I have a replica to answer what I have heard from my colleagues. On the other hand, my colleagues had mentioned many things which I wanted to mention today, including the draft laws, which I do not wish to discuss now. Moreover, I perceive those draft laws not at the level of legal novelty, so to say. For me, those draft laws are just a manifestation of some political trend reflecting the interests of some political players who play rather outstanding roles in Ukraine, and who in this way, via the draft laws, try to declare that Ukraine, from their point of view, is moving in the wrong direction. Together with Valery, we have been working for more than 20 years in the area of international policy and the European integration. Before my work in the Renaissance Foundation, this was my competence field. And I can observe how the vector of European integration had changed during the last 20 years, while several years ago, we were discussing the choice of a vector, European vector, and we perceived it like the point at which we had to choose whether we should follow Russia or we would like to join Europe. Today we find ourselves in quite different realities. On the one hand, we had become a victim of an aggression in terms of the Russian vector. But implementation of the European vector had involved the forces and the interests which were not at the surface, which could be found only deeper. And some groups felt a threat, and now there is a broad front against European vector in Ukrainian society. Now, civil opinion and public opinion and our relations with aggressive Russia are in a situation that nobody dares to challenge the European integration vector. But instead of doing this direct deterioration of the idea, some people try to cripple the reforms, try to cripple the vector of European integration, and they managed to change some notions and some mechanisms which went in depth and involved the deep mechanisms. Truly speaking, we have ruined some ways of some sources of income, and those people who benefited from the income, they united into one front line. And while they do not dare to come forth politically, but they come forth in informational area and clearly distinguishes who are their enemies. This is actually the alliance of collective forces of Medvedchuk with collective forces of Kolomoisky. So open pro-Russian forces in Ukraine and the most archaic part of Ukrainian oligarchs who have their strong opinion how the state corporations should be managed, how financial resources should be streamlined, etc. And we clearly observe that the oppression to reforms grows. Of course, they cannot say openly that European choice is wrong, but they can discredit the representatives of NGOs which promote implementation of the reforms. This might be Jan Soros's, or this could be NGOs with foreign money support. You may use any appropriate formulation, and all that formulations are intended to be used in with one purpose. Dubinsky is a troll who is a public figure who is capable to mimicker to many spheres. He is a blogger, he is a member of parliament, he is a financial expert, he is an expert, he is a journalist, whoever you want. So all that cohort which is in the parliament from the servant of people, Dubinsky, Shari, Partnov, they speak one voice, actually. This is an alliance of collective Medvedchuk with collective Kolomoisky. They actualize the narratives, they promote that narratives, and they understand that this draft law won't be passed in this version as it is, but they are working hard in a specific direction. They want to fix in the social minds and even in the mind of the president distrust to these NGOs. This is a psychological trick which was tested in many countries. If you want to discredit somebody, it's very easy to do, having announced that person, NGO, group of people, the carriers of enemies' interests, and opposition platform Partnov submitted some draft laws which has no chances to be passed by the parliament, but submitting those draft laws, they formulate senses. Now we are living in different time, different from the moment when the communists had red banners, and we clearly understood that they were guys from the past. Now these people whom I described just now, they are sure that the future belongs to them. They have a lot of money. Medvedchuk has a lot of Russian money to support his TV channels, while Telegram channels used by those by that group of opinion makers, it is rather dangerous because thus they are forming senses. It is a part of a bigger project, and the main objective of that bigger project is to stop Ukraine on its path to the west, to make Ukraine the border state, the frontier state, which would be used as a bridge, as a gray zone between Russia and the West. Those people who promote this idea are very happy with this sense of gray zone. They are not very eager to be subordinated to Russia, but in the gray zone of so-called independent Ukraine, they might live very happily with all their properties. So their objective is to work in that direction. So our main task is not just to stop the passage of this very draft law, but we should discredit the whole narrative offered by those people whom I described. And doing this, discrediting the intentions of those people should be the main task for the next political cycle. So on the one hand, we have to continue our path to the European future. On the other hand, prevent transformation of Ukraine into so-called gray zone. Thank you, Mr. Sushko. I have only one very short comment. At the moment when I finished my intervention, I recollected one very important thing. When we speak about so-called financing of the influence, so-called, I would like to remind to all people that all the donors who donate money, they have ethical code which clearly says that donation of money should not be seen as a source of influence on policies. Sometimes we can see the abuse of such ethical codes. Last autumn, one of our donors, who is recipient of the USAID assistance, tried to point out that we were criticizing President Zelensky too much, and at that very moment I was very much surprised, and I said, are you serious when you say this? Then in this case I will call for the press conference. And that person immediately stepped back and said, no, I just joked. And that is our principle, overall principle is transparency and firmness in our principles. Each year we publish our financial reports very in all the details, showing how we use each dollar or each hryvnia which we get from donors. So that's a lie that foreign donors influence positions of NGOs. Of course, the influence could be seen only in the policy of donor organizations, that they choose to support this project and reject to support another one. So this is the only possible source of impact. And one more aspect now Ukrainian legislation allows that what is called influence on the policies via support of one project and not support of another. Then the foreign assistance is very much diversified. It does not come from one source. And my experience of governmental work suggests that the system of rotation of in government bodies, which exists in the United States and many Western countries, when government officials, after several years of work in public sector, then they go either to business or to NGOs, then they come back to the public sector in order to enlarge the vision, and to improve the qualities. So our today's discussion, although not all the invited NGOs were able to attend, I believe that many NGOs are able to watch us via digital platforms. I believe that the human rights are of primarily importance, and here we face an attempt to discredit not so much NGOs in this country, but the progress, the way forward to Europe in this country, because the NGOs and the government structures who cooperate with them, they are rather advanced. They are very much supportive of our European aspirations, and that's good that the people in power today, they did not subdue to that idea, but we should be very, very attentive. And in Russia, when the similar process started, they were unable to predict the result, and today you can see the result. And Mr. Sushko mentioned that Russian attack had become the result of our European aspirations. I would like to specify even more that insufficient European aspirations, vacuum of security, the successful implementation of the gray zone in Ukraine allowed Russia to implement its aggression, to apply its aggressive attempts without that gray zone. With stronger European aspirations, Ukraine might be more strong against Russia. Now there is one more attempt to bring Ukraine to the gray zone, because people are preoccupied very much with their current problems. They are not inclined to pay attention to civil society issues, and some of them may not even understand what's going on. So my experience from the past, when I observed what may happen when a bigger part of civil society make omissions, do not pay attention at important things, how grave results they may have, and this actually may result in pressure from power. The repressive bodies may start to do this pressure. I clearly observed how enforcement agencies like SBU, like police bodies and some financial bodies started to persecute NGOs with like tax inspections, etc., trying to suppress this way forward. I wanted to underscore that our organization believes that the draft law number 3564, which is registered, is dangerous, and it should be reviewed by the parliamentary committees and could be at any moment put to the attention of plenary room. And I would not be that easy and relaxed as to the impossibility to pass this law. Look, they have just amended the anti-corruption law where officials may not declare the property which is registered registered with the MP's children, for example. So thus, the draft law may become a reality, and thus NGOs may get the David Star on a shoulder. What is even more important, that all those persecutions are intended to involve the businesses who cooperate with the NGOs who are supported with foreign money, including publishing houses who print the brochures, or the owners of landowners of property which is rented for office premises, etc. So I encourage MPs from all political factions, and Mr. Oleksandr Kornienko is the head of the Servant of the People faction, to organize a meeting with representatives of NGOs since they have demonstrated that Mr. Dubinsky gains their trust as the head of the Kiev regional, the Servant of the People organization. Let us meet together, let us discuss this, let us build up a dialogue with this Servant of the People faction, and try to convince them that this draft law is harmful for Ukrainian citizens, for Ukrainian society at large. Thank you. From very attentive, very detailed scrutiny, we have stepped forward to rather general things, and I would like to thank to all the participants who have vast experience, and we understand how this may eventually become negative for the country. We will disseminate links to our today's discussion in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and also send this link to the parliamentary committee where the draft law passes its scrutiny. So I hope that this draft law would neither harmfully influence Ukrainian parliament nor Ukrainian society. I wish you to continue your work efficiently in rather difficult conditions. And by the way, you save money of Ukrainian taxpayers, and the attribution that you are non-for-profit organization only means that you work not for profit and that you do not make any business. From institutional point of view, work in public sector means stability for a person, while NGO sector, civil society sector, is very mobile, very unstable, and those people who work for it, they bear a lot of risks for themselves and their families, and we wish a lot of wisdom to the current power, and we keep in mind that lack of wisdom which Yanukovych team had. Let us stop at this stage and not try to go deeper into this issue. If the draft law would have a chance to go to the plenary room, then we will involve even broader team to discuss the situation. So thank you very much for your discussion, and I wish you all the best.